Hello. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about the pelvic girdle and the lower limb. So beginning with the pelvic girdle, I've thrown in some pictures and some videos throughout this PowerPoint, but I'm just going to briefly go through the PowerPoint with you, play these videos, and give you the ability to follow along in Sakai. So hopefully this will make your lives a little bit easier. So I'm going to start then talking about the pelvic girdle. So we've talked about the pectoral girdle already in class, but the pelvic girdle actually includes the coxal or pelvic bones, which happens to be three bones that have fused together. So we have the ilium, which you see here in this reddish orange color. The pubis is the orange bone that you see here. And then finally the ischium is this purple bone that you see here and here. Okay, so whenever you're looking at these two pictures, this picture on the left, the A, is actually the lateral view of the hip bone, and then the medial view of the hip bone is over here in picture B. And I'll explain that as I'm going through the videos as well. So in terms of the pelvis, whenever we are just looking at the pelvis as a whole, we basically break this up into two different major regions. So we have the greater pelvis, which you see in the green. Anything that's in a green structure here is considered greater pelvis. And then anything in yellow is considered lesser pelvis. Okay, so sort of this inlet area and the essentially most of the ischium and the pubis bones. One hip bone is called a coxal bone or a hemipelvis. Hemi means half, so it's half of a pelvis. The pelvic inlet is part of the lesser pelvis and essentially just denotes the territory from one side of the lesser pelvis to the other side of the lesser pelvis. Um, the pelvic brim then would be the section, essentially the two pubic bones where they come together forms a pelvic brim. The pubic symphysis is the point at which the two hip bones meet anteriorly at this pubic symphysis. The symphysis is made of cartilage. Okay, so this is a joint. And then finally is the pelvic outlet. And essentially the pelvic outlet is measured from the pubic area of the coxal bone back to the sacrum or coccyx area of the articulating sacrum and coccyx here. So basically, if you kind of flipped this picture, if you kind of turned it to one side or another, you'd be measuring from essentially the area here straight back to the sacrum or coccyx. So I'm going to start talking first with the ilium, and then there's a short video that will play that has me going through the structures on the bones themselves that I highly encourage you to watch. So the ilium structures that you guys should be able to recognize and know are the ella, the iliac crest, which is the part if you're putting your hands on your hips, you are feeling your iliac crest, your ASIS, your AIIS, PSIS, PIIS, the greater sciatic notch. And then actually in this picture, you can't see the iliac fossa. I would have to rotate the hip to the medial side, which you'll see in the next video. So this is a lateral view of the ilium. turn off the laser pointer so I can play this video for you. The bones of the lower extremity. So as you can see, I'm holding the hip bone currently. The hip bone we actually separate into three distinct bones because it is a combination of three different bones that have been fused together. So the first bone that was fused is this top bone, and that one's called the ilium. And then you can see on the bottom portion there's this pointy side. This is the pubis. So right through here is the pubis. And then sort of this rounded off side is the ischium. And so this is your butt bone, if you will. So I'm going to start with some different markings on the ilium. So this top bone, and then work my way through the ischium and the pubis. So beginning with the ilium, I'm going to get you guys oriented first. So let me just put this the way that it is in the PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint has the picture that kind of looks like this. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to keep my hands out of the way so you can kind of see. But the PowerPoint kind of looks like this. And anything in red on the PowerPoint you see as what is called the ilium. Now what I'm giving you right now is the lateral view. So when this bone is actually in the body, you can see this rougher surface here. This is the part that articulates with the sacrum. And so when it's actually in the body, it sits like this. And then, so kind of like this. And you can imagine the other hip bone come over here on this side. So where the big opening is through here, this is where the femur, the thigh bone, is going to sit. And this side with this rougher surface would then be considered the medial side, and thus this side, the one that is in your PowerPoint, is the lateral view. Okay, so let's go through some of these markings on the ilium lateral view. First, we're going to talk the ala. So the ala is simply the smooth surface that's sort of kind of depressed right here across the big fanning portion of the ilium. Next is the iliac crest. And so the iliac crest is this top portion here. Next, we have some words called anterior superior iliac spine, anterior inferior, posterior, and posterior. Okay, so let's reorient ourselves. Like I said before, when this bone is sitting in the body, it kind of looks like this, thus making this part the front of the body, the anterior part of the body, and back here where this rougher surface is, remember this is where the sacrum is going to articulate, this would then be the posterior side of this bone. All right, so I'm going to turn you back to the same view that we have on the PowerPoint. That means that this first point here, this point here, is the anterior superior iliac spine, and then you can see it kind of caves inward, so it sort of caves inward here, and then it comes back out. The second point is the anterior inferior iliac spine. Moving to the posterior side, we have the posterior superior iliac spine. Then you can see there's that little curvature inward, and we would have the posterior inferior iliac spine. Just beneath the posterior inferior iliac spine, we have this big, huge section here. This is called the greater sciatic notch. Greater sciatic notch. And then finally, the last marking, I mentioned it in the PowerPoint, is the iliac fossa. So this is the section you actually have to turn it to a medial view. And you see this smooth portion here. This medial side smooth portion is the iliac fossa. So as a reminder, this smooth portion on the lateral side was the ala. The smooth portion on this medial side is the iliac fossa. So that takes care of the markings for the ilium, and now we'll move on to the ischium and the pubis. All right, everybody, today I'm going to introduce. So as far as the ischium goes, there's really only four markings that I'm going to ask you guys to know. And so on the last slide, you guys saw where I pointed out the greater sciatic notch. Then once we reach the ischium, which again is part of the butt bone, you have this little projection. This one's actually called the ischial spine. And then just beneath the ischial spine, you'll see the lesser sciatic notch. The purple bone in its entirety is called the ischium. The tuberosity is the part of the butt bone that you actually sit on whenever you're sitting in a chair. And it has a little bit of a rougher surface. And then finally, the ischial ramus is projecting off of the ischium going towards the pubis, where it's going to meet up with the pubic ramus. So I just finished talking to you guys about the ilium, and now we can move on to the ischium. And so I said before the ischium is the butt bone, and so my fingers are actually grabbing onto the ischium right now. And so I'm going to just reorient us again. If this bone were sitting in the body, it would sit like this. And you can imagine the other hip bone's going to come in right here on this side. And so giving us then a lateral view and slightly inferior view, we can see this rounded portion being the ischium, and then this pointier portion being the pubis. And so the ischium is going to be on the posterior side of the body. Right, so if I put this in place, you can see that the ischium, which I'm holding on to, is posterior, whereas the pubis, that pointier section, this pointier bone up here, is more anterior. So as far as markings on the ischium goes, I will just start kind of where we left off with the ilium. So if you remember from a couple of minutes ago with the ilium, we had the posterior inferior iliac spine, and then we had the greater sciatic notch. Just after the greater sciatic notch, we see another point, and this point here, let's see if I can get you guys to see it better. So the point right there, so we see the greater sciatic notch. We have a point. That point is called the ischial spine. And then just after the ischial spine, we have another small notch, and that second small notch here is called the lesser sciatic notch. And so we would have greater sciatic notch, then the ischial spine, then the lesser sciatic notch. And the next marking that you guys, I'm asking you to know, is the ischial tuberosity. And so as I'm kind of moving and manipulating the light, you can see the rough surface here on the ischium. This is the tuberosity, the ischial tuberosity. And then you can see, so from this angle, hopefully, there we go, you can see this flat section here. So about until that marking. So you can see where it's kind of flat across, and then it goes down, and then it curves back up, and it kind of comes together about here. So about right here, if you could like tie a string around there. This section from the tuberosity up until that depressed marking This would all be then considered the ischial ramus. Okay? So, ischial tuberosity, ischial ramus. We have also the lesser sciatic notch and the ischial spine. Okay, and all of these are viewed from the lateral side of the body. You can see all of this stuff from the lateral or posterior angles. So lateral, if I go entirely posterior, where you can really see your notches, and you can't really see much from the anterior view. From the medial view, you could still see the ramus, okay, the ischial ramus. Okay. So now that we've taken care of the ilium and the ischium, the last thing to talk about is the pubis. And as far as the pubis goes, this is the anterior portion. So in the body, it's this front portion where the two hip bones are going to come together at this pubic symphysis that I mentioned earlier. In terms of the pubis itself, so I have the medial and the lateral views down here. So the lateral view is A and B is this medial view. The body of the pubis itself kind of sits about right here, right through this area. And then we have the inferior pubic ramus, which is the one that is meeting up with the ischial ramus. We have the superior pubic ramus, basically, which is traveling from the pubis up towards the ilium. Finally, the only marking that you can really see individually, basically from one hip bone, is this obturator foramen, which is this giant hole that you see down here. And then the pubic arch, you really need to put two hip bones together in order to kind of visualize it. But essentially, it's taking the angle between, basically following the lines down the pubic inferior pubic ramus of both hip bones and measuring this angle. Okay, so for example, females tend to have a larger angle, whereas males tend to have a smaller angle. So here's a short video about the pubis. So moving on to the pubis, right now I'm showing you the medial view of the hip bone. This would be, again, how it would be oriented in the body, somewhat like this, with the femur coming in to this section here, this opening. And by the way, this opening is called the acetabulum. And essentially, the acetabulum is where the three bones are fusing together, and so it kind of helps to delineate the differences amongst then the ilium, this top section, the ischium, and finally the pubis. So let's talk about the pubis then. So giving you the lateral view, the big hole that you can see right in this section, this is called the obturator foramen. Okay, so this big hole here. So this is the lateral view. If I gave you the medial view, you can still see the obturator foramen here. All right. The next marking that you can see from this lateral view is just the body of the pubis. And so that is this section that's right here. This is all considered body of the pubis. Okay, this whole section here. For the next marking, the superior and inferior ramus. So the superior ramus, I'm going to turn it so you can see the medial view. The superior ramus is this one up here. I can wrap my finger all the way around this section. Okay, so this would be the superior ramus. Okay. And thus the inferior ramus would be So remember before, I'm going to turn you back laterally, how I said the ischial went until about this point right here. So remember I said it caved in, it stopped right there. So the section just after the ischial we have the inferior pubic ramus. Okay, and it's sort of the connection between the ischium and the body of the pubis. Okay, so between the ischial ramus and the body of the pubis, we have this little section of inferior pubic ramus. So in terms of the pubis itself, there's also a little notch. You don't have to know this per se, but you can see a little notch from the lateral view best. If I do like a lateral inferior, you can see this is the pubic tubercle. And so giving you that front view again, just like it would look in the body, something like this. On this surface here, this is where the pubic symphysis is going to occur. So there's going to be a piece of cartilage right here that's going to connect this hip bone to the other one that's going to come in and sit like this. All right, and so whenever we're talking about the pubic arch, if you can imagine another hip bone coming in and connecting here, it's also going to have a mirror image of this. And so the pubic arch then just refers to this angle. So if I have another one in here, it would be this bottom angle here, where the two hip bones are coming together at the pubis itself, at the pubic symphysis. So you can imagine drawing an imaginary line here, from here to here, and that is the pubic arch. So I just mentioned a couple of slides ago about the pubic arch and how females tend to have a wider angle than the male pelvis. So these are just some of the major structural differences between the males and the females in terms of the appearance of the pelvis. So in terms of the pelvic inlet, remember that is kind of this inner diameter of the pelvis, and so the female pelvis would have a wider, more oval shaped. So you can see the shape of the pelvis itself is more oval in here, whereas the male is kind of more narrow and maybe sort of more heart shaped. If you can imagine drawing kind of like a heart right through there. The pubic arch in females tends to be 100 degrees or more in terms of the angle, whereas a male tends to be 90 degrees or less. The acetabulum, which remember are these sockets where the femur is going to go in. The acetabulum of the male pelvis tends to be closer together compared with the female pelvis, which hopefully should make sense because the female pelvis appears wider. Additionally, the ischial tuberosities for females tend to be everted, and for males tend to be inverted. I'm sorry, you can hear my dogs. So sorry that you guys could hear my dogs there for a second. But perks of working at home, right? So finally, the last thing on here that I wanted to mention was the female pelvis, the coccyx. Females tend to have straighter and more mobile coccyx, whereas males tend to have coccyx that are actually more anteriorly curved. So imagine this male pelvis, the coccyx here kind of coming at us, the screen, and they tend to be less mobile. And basically this entire design and structure is set up for the birthing process in females. It's much easier to fit a newborn through all of these different features compared with the features of a male pelvis. Okay. And so here are the articulated pelvises. Now we're going to talk about the lower extremity, which includes the femur, the patella, tibia, fibula, and the foot, which will include the tarsals, the metatarsals, and the phalanges. So the femur itself, here's your anterior view and here's your posterior view. The head of the femur, so this is going to be the part that goes into the hip bone. You'll see on the next slide the fovea capitis, the neck, greater and lesser trochanters, and on the anterior view you have this intertrochanteric line. On the posterior view, it's not a line, it's actually a crest. On the posterior view, you can also see the gluteal tuberosity, which are locations where different gluteal muscles are going to attach. The linea aspera, which is you're also going to have some muscle attachment in terms of hamstrings specifically, being attached along the linea aspera. The neck structures are the condyles. So these are the smoother surfaces that are going to articulate with the tibia. And then the intercondylar fossa. And then on the sort of lateral sides of the condyles, either medial or lateral sides of these condyles, we would have then the medial epicondyle, which is going to be on the same side as the head, or the lateral epicondyle, which will be on the lateral side of the femur. And the patella would rest right along this patellar surface. So this next video is actually not me talking. So I just wanted to mix it up, and this guy's pretty good, but he's really fast. So if you need to, you can replay this video.
Here we are with the femur, the biggest, the baddest, the longest bone in our body. If I asked you to defend yourself against zombies, you would grab this right out of a bone box and use it to fight them off. And this is the nice thing about the femur. It has such large markings that it's hard to miss them. So let's begin to describe, of course, as we always start off with laterality. What structures are there to help us to determine if this is a left or right? Well, very simply put, the head gives us two, both proximal towards you as well as midline medial. So the head is medial and proximal, and then of course you could take a look, well then which one is it? Is this anterior or is this side anterior if this was my body? Well, very simply put, if you see a gigantic line called the linea aspera, that is always posterior. So this would be considered a right, or I'm sorry, a left femur. So this is a left femur. So let's go over to some of the structures that we need to take a look at. So right here is the femur with the head. We already covered that. And the neck, if I were to try to choke this out. And on top of the head is this little dimple. This little dimple is what we call the fovea capitis, literally translated dimple on the head. So fovea capitis. So we have the fovea capitis, the head, the neck, and then you have these two very large mountains of bone. This big chunk called the greater trochanter, this smaller one called the lesser trochanter. Now we find these two are connected by a couple lines. One on the anterior side is called the intertrochanteric line. On the posterior side, with this actual crest, you can see it has this big ridge called the intertrochanteric crest. So intertrochanteric crest, intertrochanteric line. On the posterior side, also, you'll see again the linea aspera, but it flares out into these two kind of spreads. And on the lateral side, it becomes very rough. This roughened area is called the gluteal tuberosity on the femur. So that's nice. That's where your gluteus maximus is going to insert on. Or, I'm sorry, some gluteal muscles, not just the maximus. But you'll see this is a place for attachment of the gluteal muscles. As we continue to move further down, we take a look at the distal end, and what you can imagine is there's a couple things. Keep in mind that this side is the medial side, so we travel this all the way down. So of course this side would be medial. We had two large condyles. This big large condyle, which is a smooth articulated kind of process, medial condyle, lateral condyle, and above them, these big knobs are called the epicondyle. So of course, medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle. In between is this gigantic intercondylar fossa, shallow depression or groove. So this is an intercondylar fossa, and On the anterior side, you can imagine this is a surface in which the patella is going to rub, called the patellar surface. Last marking here is this little kind of nub here. This is called the adductor tubercle on the medial side, which your adductor longus muscle is going to attach, or I'm sorry, adductor magnus muscle is going to attach to. Let's take a look at all these structures again. Head, fovea capitis with the neck, greater trochanter, lesser trochanter with the intertrochanteric crest on the posterior side, intertrochanteric line on the anterior side at the large shaft with the linea aspera, but right by here is the gluteal tuberosity. You get the medial and lateral condyles with the epicondyles on the side, and then the intercondylar fossa with the patellar surface, and then lastly the adductor tubercle, this little kind of bump right here.
So I know he talks really fast. Like I said, if you need to go over that a couple more times, you're absolutely welcome to do so. Or there's some other videos on YouTube that you can check out. So we are going to move on to the next slide. So we're going to talk briefly about the tibia and the fibula. And so I'm going to go through these structures on the next slide with you in a video. So the next bones that I'm going to show you guys are the tibia and the fibula. So beginning with the tibia, the first marking that I have on the list are the tibial plateaus. So just a reminder, the tibia is the shin bone, and in terms of markings, we're going to start again at the tibial plateaus. And so whenever we're orienting ourselves with the tibia, it's actually more beneficial to look at the inferior portion. So this down here is going to be medial. So this is going to be on the inside of your ankle. Excuse me. So that means this whole side over here is all medial, which makes this a right tibia. And it actually lines up nicely with our right femur. I'm going to give you guys a full shot of that. Okay. So continuing on with markings of the tibia, we're going to start with the tibial plateaus. And so in order to see those, I'm actually just going to kind of hold this up a little bit closer to you guys. So the tibial plateaus are the regions up here. So both sides, this one and on this one. All right, so basically these are the areas where the menisci are going to sit, which are those little cushions in between the femur and the tibia. The next marking is the intercondylar eminence, and so that our intercondylar eminence would be sort of right in the middle of these tibial plateaus. You see these little ridges. Next are the medial and lateral condyles. So I've already established that this side with a little pointy thing at the bottom is medial. So the medial condyle is actually this section wrapping kind of all the way around here. And then the lateral condyle would be opposite side, wrapping kind of all the way around here. And you can really see the condyles where they used to have a growth plate right here that has now merged together to form an adult bone. So really, essentially, the condyles are the place in between the shaft of the bone and where the growth plate used to be before it fused as an adult. Next is the tibial tuberosity, and so that would be on the anterior view. That is this little bump here, and actually if you feel your shin bone, if you kind of start sort of in the middle of your shin bone and work your way, so you start kind of down here and work your way up, eventually you're going to feel this little knobby thing, and you're feeling your tibial tuberosity. Next is the anterior crest, and it's the very mountain ridge-like part of the shin bone. This area is actually just, it's covered only by a very thin layer of skin, and that's its only protection. And so this is why a lot of times like soccer players will wear shin guards, because it's a very susceptible area to injury. It's very painful to be kicked in the shin. There's no extra fat or protection in that area. So this area then is the anterior crest. Finally, the medial malleolus is this guy right here. Okay. Next is the fibula. And the fibula, I really am only asking you guys to know two structures on here. And so in terms of the fibula, this side that's kind of more chunkier and squared off is the head of the fibula. And then I'm going to turn this just around here. This side kind of looks like the medial malleolus of the tibia. So this guy right here is the lateral malleolus. So this is your outside ankle bone that you can see and feel quite easily right on the outside of your ankle. And together, the tibia and the fibula sit like such. Okay, so here's our medial malleolus over here, the lateral malleolus over here, so this would be the outside of your foot. Here we can see our tibial tuberosity, our condyles of the tibia, where the menisci are going to sit on top of those tibial plateaus, and you can actually see the intercondylar eminence in here as well. Okay, and of course the crest, here the anterior crest of the tibia. Okay, so all of these bones then are going to articulate with the foot bone, which we're going to talk about next.
So here's just some real bone pictures of the tibia and fibula for you to look at. And some more up close ones. These are all in the PowerPoint. And finally, we reach the foot, and the foot is made of 7 bones as far as the tarsals go. So that would be these guys down here. And we have 5 metatarsals. The big toe is considered the hallux. So the thumb is called the pollex, and the big toe is called the hallux. It actually has 2 sesamoid bones on the inferior side, which are embedded in a tendon, and something special to note, it does not have a middle phalange or a middle phalanx. The plural is phalange and the singular is phalanx. And so in terms of the remaining toes, each of them has a proximal, middle, and distal phalanx. The tarsals themselves, so as I mentioned on the last slide, we have several bones here, including the talus, which is the bone that articulates directly with the tibia. And then we have the calcaneus, which is the heel bone. So here's looking at the top of the foot, and then this would be looking at the bottom of the foot. So here's the calcaneus from this view, and you can see that the talus is kind of hidden behind it. Next is the cuboid. And so it is the lateral bone that is between the calcaneus and the 4th and the 5th metatarsal. Moving medially, we have the lateral cuneiform, intermediate and medial cuneiform. And in between the metatarsals and the cuneiform, so I guess just behind those, just posterior to those, is the navicular. Okay, and so here's the navicular, which is again located between the talus and the cuneiforms. And so here on the next slide, you'll have a video of me showing you these bones as best as I could on the real life structure model.
So I will finish off our lecture today by talking about the foot and the bones of the foot. And so the foot itself has 7 tarsals, which are the foot bones. And so in terms of those bones, we have first is the talus, and the talus is the one that actually articulates with the tibia. And so you're seeing a lateral view of the foot right now. And so I gave you a front view or a medial view. The talus then is this bone here. Okay, so I'm going to give you a superior view because that's the view that you guys have in your PowerPoint. So the talus is this bone. Next is the calcaneus, and we kind of have to do a lateral view to see the calcaneus. So it's a pretty big bone. I can also give you an inferior view. So here's an inferior view. Here's the heel bone. So medial view, posterior view then. So calcaneus. So to give you guys back the view that you have in your PowerPoint. The next, excuse me, bone that we have here is the cuboid. I'm sorry about that. Made my brightness a little too bright. So the next bone, is the cuboid. And so that would be this guy right here, lateral side of the foot. So here's your pinky toe on this side. So we have the cuboid. And then we would have the lateral cuneiform, the medial, or the intermediate, middle or intermediate cuneiform, the medial cuneiform, and then just behind the 3 cuneiforms is where you'll find the navicular. Okay, so the navicular is located between the talus and the 3 cuneiforms. Now, just past those foot bones, we will have then the metatarsals. So metatarsals, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we would have the phalanges, so the proximal and the distal phalanx, the proximal, middle, and distal phalanx, proximal, middle, distal, proximal, middle, distal, proximal, middle, distal. Okay, so notice all of the toes except for the big toe have proximal, middle, and distal phalanges, but the big toe, also known as the hallux, has only a proximal and a distal phalanx. Okay.
So here are just some more pictures of labeled bones and some more. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via email or drop a remind message to me, and I will be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Other than that, I don't have anything else for you guys as far as the lecture goes, and you can go ahead and work on the assignments.